On today's show, what are the biggest questions for the Houston Rockets going into this NBA season? Do they have a true 1A superstar out of the young core? Who is going to be their go-to guy in crunch time? And so much more. It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way that you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Like and subscribe on YouTube. And while you're there, drop us a comment, do a drive-by, just say go Rockets, share your thoughts on the episode. It helps us out so much. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being one of our amazing everydayers. Joining us now for part one of our two-part season preview series is none other than a pair of your weekly co-hosts. We got none other than NBA draft enthusiast and diehard Houston Rockets fan Madison Moore, as well as the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track him down on Twitter at MadmanLeaks and at Ben DuBose. We've got a pair of back-to-back awesome episodes here for you guys. We're going to be talking about the biggest questions heading into this season for your Houston Rockets, as well as making some bold predictions. We got some spicy takes lined up for you guys here. But first and foremost, let's start with, you guys have already heard me blather on and share my insight and thoughts about the extensions for Jalen Green and for Alperen Sengun. But I want to give Madison and Ben a second to kind of share what they thought about those contract extensions for both of the two kind of cornerstone guys for the Houston Rockets. So Madison, take it away, man. Just give us your immediate reaction to those extensions.
My immediate reaction was, my immediate reaction first was for Jalen Green, because he came out, he dropped first, and I was like, okay, is this a good deal, right? I'm used to Stone coming up with these creative deals that are, that when you first hear the numbers, you know that there's more coming out after with that's incentive based. And after I got all the numbers, I understood what was going on. I thought, wow, this is a very interesting deal. I still do not know if I fully love it. Right. I think it shows a little bit of risk on both sides, which typically is the sign of a good deal. Right. And I think the Rockets got to come in a little under that cap number, save them some cap space in that first year, which gives them the flexibility to do more and improve the team. But for me, this really shows how much the team believes in Jalen Green and his growth, right? Because to give him that much of a number from what he's shown and the up and down nature of his game, it seems like they really believe in the work that he's put in over the offseason, the way he's worked through his struggles over the course of the seasons past. And they really decided to, I like to say, run it back with him, like to see if he can really bring all these things together and be the superstar player. Now, for Jalen Green, from his perspective, I thought it was an excellent deal. I thought he got paid. He got the player option, really. So if he just takes off, he has the opportunity to get back in free agency and really recoup an even higher number on the back end of that deal. And so for him, I think it's a home run. And for the Rockets, I think it's to be determined, because you do have some risk. Now, for Alperen Sengun, I'll be sweet and short. Beautiful for the Rockets. Just an absolute masterclass from Rafael Stone. I mean, we really have to give him his kudos for this getting Sengun on such a discount when you compare it to what other players in his draft class have gotten. Man, this is just highway robbery. But at the same time, I'm very happy for Sengun, because 34 million, 38 million. That's a lot of money. 38 million a year, right? That's a ton of money. So he's set up for life. That's life-changing money, and I'm really happy for him.
Yeah, they can't make jokes about Fred with the bread anymore, because now Jalen's got bread, now Sengun's got bread. It hasn't kicked in yet, but they've got the guaranteed bread down the line. Ben, how are you feeling about the extensions?
Yeah, I would agree with Madison's framing. I think generally the Sengun deal is a great one. The Jalen deal is a good one, but I think it comes back to the leverage point. I think with Sengun, because that cap hold next summer was so low, there was clearly merit to the Rockets playing this out. And so it put them in a much better negotiating position, as opposed to with Jalen, since there wasn't much of a delta between the average annual value of this extension versus just having his cap hold on the books. Unless the Rockets were willing to cut bait with him altogether, and I don't think that was a likely scenario after what we saw in March, then the Rockets just weren't starting from as advantaged of a negotiating position. Now that's offset somewhat by Sengun being a more proven player to this point, but I think just contractually, the reason the Sengun deal is a little better is simply because of the negotiating position that Rafael Stone and the front office had going in. My general thoughts on it, I find it tough to distinguish between the two because I do think that they're interconnected. And so I look at, the Jalen deal is good, the Sengun deal is great. Overall, it's a very good day. It's not that there's no risk, because certainly the Rockets are giving up a little bit of flexibility in 2025 financially. They're also giving up a little bit of insurance. So if either Jalen or Sengun has a bad year or gets hurt, then they're not as protected as they would have been if they had played this out into restricted free agency. But at the same time, I think what this shows you is that the Rockets have seen enough internally to where they believe in this team and this core enough to where giving up that flexibility is worthwhile. And Fred VanVleet plays into this as well. Look, you're not going to have as much flexibility next offseason if you're going to keep Fred, which I think is clearly the plan. We've heard comments from Fred throughout training camp indicating that he plans on being here beyond this contract. It sounds like from all my conversations with the Rockets, they plan on that being the case as well. So if you're keeping Fred, you're not going to have as much cap room anyway. And once you get one deal done with Jalen or Sengun, it sort of incentivizes you to get the other one done as well, because how much is that flexibility really worth if you're going to be keeping this team together? And so for those reasons, it makes sense to sort of bet on the status quo. And the other reason, look, I talked about what the Rockets gave up in these negotiations, the flexibility, the player options, which, typically are much more friendly to the player than they are the team. And it's something that historically the Rockets haven't given a lot of. Why did they give those in these negotiations? Because they're getting sub-max deals. Both Jalen and Sengun are giving up something relative to the max, not just the 5 years, $225 million, but also their deals aren't tied to potential all-NBA escalators. So the Rockets are getting a lot back. And so because of that, they are in a much better position to potentially extend other guys in the young core as this team gets way more expensive. As we get into the mid to late 2020s, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Thompson, Cam Whitmore, Reed Shepherd, as all of these guys get into their second contracts and this team gets way more expensive, the dollars you save here on Sengun and Jalen can potentially help you keep this core together. We've heard Rafael Stone say earlier this offseason that he thinks the Rockets will have the ability to do that. The question is, in the CBA, where it's so punitive to keep these teams together, how can they do it? This is how you can potentially do it. So for me, it's a very good day. I mentioned Jalen having a stronger negotiating position going in. I think that's offset a little bit by Sengun obviously being the more proven player. And so because of that, Sengun got the 5-year deal. Jalen only got the 3. But I think, the Rockets are willing to do that because with Sengun, he's already proven enough to where even if you get in a pinch and for whatever reason, there's hard decisions to be made, Sengun's going to be a positive asset no matter what on this contract. He has already done enough to where at an average annual value in the 30s, worst case, he's like Domantas Sabonis a few years ago. He is a positive value. Jalen, it's a little dicier, but here's the thing. With it only being a 3-year deal, you can get out of Jalen's deal or trade him, who's expiring, by the time Amen and Reed are coming up for their deals, and this team is getting way more expensive. So the bottom line is the Rockets have given themselves a pathway to keep this young core together long term, and they've also given themselves options to move on if they need to. And so when you look at the balance, it's clearly the Rockets, indicating some content with this core they've developed. They have more information than any of us in terms of data. They know the makeup of these guys. So for the Rockets to look at this team and say, you know what, we're going to sacrifice a little bit of flexibility for the sake of giving us more options to keep this group together, it's a really good sign. It confirms that what Rafael Stone, Patrick Fertitta, Eli White, is that front office, what they're trying to build, they are believing in it for a reason. And so as I see it, great day.
Absolutely a great day. And when we ask Uncle Jeff how they did,
he did great. Thanks, Jeff. Sorry.
Oh man, I'm gonna be using that all season long. Look, the extensions for Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, that was one of the biggest questions or set of questions facing this Houston Rockets team coming into the season. That's how we're kind of marketing this first episode, as the biggest questions facing the team. But what other questions are facing this Houston Rockets squad as we approach the start of the 2024-2025 season? We're gonna get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you actually place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place just your first $5 bet. It's that simple. Just head on over to FanDuel.com. Take a look at all the different odds available, just different division winners, conference winners. Check out their parlay builders, season awards, or just the outright favorites to win the Super Bowl. Right now, the Chiefs plus 450, the Ravens plus 600, the Lions plus 750, right behind them, the 49ers plus 850, the Bills plus 1100, and then your Houston Texans plus 1300. So for all those odds and so much more, head on over to FanDuel.com. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. We've got our three-man weave action going on here with Madison Moore, Ben DuBose, and myself, your host, Jackson Gatlin. All right, guys, look. So the Rockets figured out those two really big questions with Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun. So that's kind of like a weight lifted. There's no longer that looming cloud of, okay, well, what's going to happen with their extensions, right? They get that kind of olive branch or that level of security gifted to them from the organization this year. For me, one of the things that I'm very curious about with this team, and I think this is going to be an important year to kind of figure this out, and maybe it's less important now that the Rockets have shown that they are fully committing to both Jalen and Sengun for the foreseeable future, giving them these contracts. But to me, we still don't know who the true 1A is on this Houston Rockets team. That to me is a really substantial question that I would hope we have an answer for at least by the end of the season, or at least we start seeing the signs of who is going to truly become that 1A star for the team. Because so far to this point, Sengun has been the closest guy to that 1A star. But how much better can Sengun get? How much better can Jalen Green get? Do one of the other young guys pop this season and take a significant step forward? That to me is a really major question mark for this team.
Yeah, I think the biggest question, even after these extensions are done, is still, can you get on a sustained basis the best version of Alperen Sengun and the best version of Jalen Green at the same time? We saw glimpses of it in the 3 weeks out of the All-Star break before Sengun got hurt. But for the most part last year, there was the first 50 or so games with Alperen Sengun leading the way, a lot of pick and roll with Fred VanVleet, and then the Jalen-centric offense from about the start of March onward. And so the question is, can you blend those together to where they are both clicking at the same time? We've seen some positive signs, in my opinion, in the preseason where it felt like the offense ran more through Sengun and Jalen looked a lot more comfortable in operating in off-ball scenarios and, not needing as many touches to be a rhythm player to get going. And so I think that's a promising sign. But again, it's a small sample. And so to me, those are the two guys going into year 4 that are closest. They're now getting paid like max or close to max players as well. So the expectations are there. So it's not that the young guys, before Jalen or after Jalen and LP, I should say, are being, precluded from joining that top tier. But I think going into the year, Jalen and LP are the guys that we're going to be focused on because year 4, the new contracts, expectations are higher. We've seen glimpses. Can they do it for a sustained period? And more importantly, can they do it at the same time? That's still the question until they do it for longer than 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. And just to follow up on that, I think that's the perfect intersection. It's this intersection between the balancing game between Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun in their two-man game. I think pick and roll will be the bread and butter of this team, as it has been, and execution of this pick and roll is paramount. I think in the half court, which is one of my biggest, which kind of leads into your big question, is like, how does this offense run in the half court? When we get into crunch time, who are we running offense through? And I think largely it'll be the pick and roll, but even more importantly, how does Jalen continue to be the lead ball handler in the pick and roll? And it's largely up to his decision making. Is he able to continuously make the right play? We know he can make the pocket pass to Sengun in the middle of the court, where Sengun, we don't have any questions about his decision making. We believe 9 times out of 10 he's going to make the right play, which kind of cements him as that 1A. But if Jalen wants to be the initiator of that play, he needs to not only be able to make that pocket pass, but he needs to be able to make the cross corner pass when guys overload to Alperen Sengun in the corner, and he needs to take care of the ball. If he doesn't take care of the ball, then he won't be initiating those reps, and it'll be guys like Fred VanVleet initiating those reps and Jalen playing in an off-ball role, which I think we might see a lot to start the season. And as Jalen gets on a heater, as we've seen him do several times already in this preseason, then we'll start to roll the ball out more to him and let him initiate once he's feeling it. And that might be a really good way to kind of ease Jalen into that role for the future and get those reps without hurting the team. That's why it's so important that his off-ball play is excellent. So he doesn't need to be the initiator to positively affect the game down the stretch.
Yeah, I use the term, 1A star, whatever, but that also, you can, rephrase it, reskin it, however you want it to be. The other way you would call it is like, who's the Rockets' go-to guy, right? Mm-hmm. Last season, it was Alperen Sengun, but unfortunately, we also saw this team really struggle in crunch time, had a terrible crunch time record, lost, they were 1-9 in games decided by like 5 or fewer points last season. And at times, right, it felt like their best option when the going got tough late in a game was to just go with Fred VanVleet, right? Steady Freddie, tried and true. He was the guy that had been in those high leverage situations before. He had the experience, he had the IQ, the wherewithal, and the skill to put it all together. But unfortunately, that's not the direction we want to see this team go, right? We don't want to see this team live and die by what Fred VanVleet can do. Obviously, we're not going to exclude him from being able to hit a game winner here and there if he needs to. But, right, can one of Jalen or Sengun become that go-to force, that focal point, even in crunch time, right? When you need a bucket down 2, down 1 with, 20 seconds left on the clock, right? Who are the Rockets going to give the ball to ultimately?
And I think it also ties back into another theme, and I suppose we can frame this as a question as well, which is how do the Rockets use their depth as an advantage rather than a disadvantage? Because we can talk about being 9-10 deep and the benefits of that, but one of the drawbacks is that, you get late in a close game, and as you guys were saying, you don't know exactly who is going to be the guy that you're going to ride to the finish. And the way this team is constructed, because no one is proven to be able to do it on an every night basis, then it probably needs to be whoever has the hot hand. One game it may be LP, maybe it's Jalen, maybe it's Fred, maybe it's Reed or Amen. And so there's opportunities in that because you can spread the wealth. It may keep you more durable over 82 games.
Whoa. The absolute disrespect to one Dillon Brooks. How dare you, Ben?
I'm sure I'll be hearing about that. But look, I think, one of the challenges that comes with that is that, we talk about this with Jalen, but it's true of a lot of players, this idea of working your way into rhythm. Well, if you are spreading the wealth, then it's tougher for these guys to individually get it going. So can they, if they're not getting regular touches, are they confident enough in their skills, in their reads? Are they doing enough work off the court to where even if they're not just getting the same reps over and over again, that they can step in and execute? Because if they are, it can be to the Rockets' advantage because it can make the Rockets far less predictable because they have a lot of different guys that can attack. That's why I don't really believe in getting bogged down in these debates you see on social media about, is Ben Thompson the point guard? Who's the point guard? How much is Fred going to operate on ball versus off? Because it's probably going to vary a lot from game to game.
Ben, you love getting bogged down in debates on social media, though.
Not those debates, other debates.
Selective choosing. Got it. Okay.
Mine for officiating. But no, to the larger point, it's, the depth presents, benefits, but it also presents, questions. And so can Ime Udoka and the Rocket staff use it to their advantages? Because, if your attack is diverse, if it's unpredictable, then yeah, there's a lot of benefits to that, but there's also some potential challenges, and that, guys aren't getting touches over and over again to feel their way into the game. So can they still be at the best versions of themselves without, as we saw Jalen a lot the last couple of years, needing to sort of dribble their way into peak form? I think with Jalen, we've seen some progress on that front, although it's been in the preseason to this point. Hopefully we see it with some of the other young guys, and even Fred, because Fred's probably going to transition into something a little more of an off-ball role, ideally this year, for the reasons Madison was laying out. So using the depth to their advantage and not having it work against them, to me, that's something that's going to be an ongoing theme for Ime Udoka.
I completely agree with you guys. Yeah, I completely agree with you guys. And this question of rotation, right? Like you said, how important is the rotation? But to Ben, your point, this ball movement, keeping guys in rhythm. You bring up the point of these guys not having the ball in their hands enough to get themselves into rhythm. And I think this team is going to have to lean on the ball movement of each other to generate easy buckets for one another in order for this offense to work and in order for everybody to be in rhythm. And I think that is what this team is going to have to bank on. Like you said, now in the crunch time, what does that look like? You know what I mean? And in the crunch time, sometimes you need guys who's just going to go out there and get a bucket. And that's why I think Jalen and LP, right? That's where that question is, are they going to be have the ball enough to have in rhythm? But I think as initiators of the offense, because I think they will be our primary initiators, including Fred, I think they will have the opportunities to get into rhythm, and whichever one is hot will probably close the game, especially if it's Jalen. But I think if neither one of them is hot, I think Alperen Sengun has shown enough in the past that we can trust him over and over again to make the right decision with the ball. And with his newfound impact as a foul drawer, I think that is going to be huge, like down the stretch of games when we need a bucket, when we're struggling to score, we can go down to Alperen Sengun and not only can he get a high percentage shot, but he can actually, draw a foul and get to the line and get 2 easy ones. And so I really think that 1A is going to fall around Alperen Sengun, but it's really going to fall on the team to keep each other in rhythm, and so that they are feeling good and ready to close in winning time. But for me, it's going to be about decision making. Like, can you guys make the right reads down the stretch? Can you take care of the ball? Can you not turn the ball over down the stretch? Can we trust you to run efficient offense?
I think the terminology you were looking for there a moment ago, Madison, was free throw merchant or foul merchant. Any one of the above would fit that perfectly. Okay, and you guys bring up some great points there about kind of the lineups and the decisions that the coaching staff is ultimately going to have to make this season, right? Who's in rhythm, who's not in rhythm. And that brings up a really great question here as to which of the 5 Rocket starters is the least likely to finish certain games throughout this season? We know that Ime Udoka has treated this team like a meritocracy at points where he's going to put the best 5 guys on the floor. So who do we think is ultimately the guy that is least likely to finish certain games this season? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Look, October's the season for wearing masks and costumes, but some of us feel like we wear a mask and hide more often than we want to. It could be at work, in social settings, or even around your own family. Therapy can help you learn to accept all parts of yourself so you can finally take off the mask. Because masks should be for Halloween fun, not for our emotions. Look, I'm somebody that's done therapy in the past, and I found it to be an incredibly cathartic experience to have an unbiased, professional third party walk me through some of the day-to-day stuff that I was dealing with in my own life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, guys, this is, I think, a fantastic kind of question here. And we're probably going to spend the rest of the show talking about this one. Is just, you look at this Rockets team, you look at all the different available lineups, right? We got just a small taste of it throughout the preseason, but they can throw out so many different effective lineups. And on any given night, right, it might not be your night. Obviously, that happens. You're going to have nights where guys are struggling to, put the ball in the bucket, or maybe you're just not, as locked in on the attention to detail on the defensive end, whatever. So maybe you're not one of the 5 best players for Ime Udoka to put out there on the floor. And I think you can look up and down the Rockets starting lineup and make a pretty strong argument. There's almost, I think maybe everybody except for Fred, because Fred is just Fred. And he's so integral to the success of this team as it currently stands. But everybody else, 2 through 5 on the court, from Jalen to Dillon to Jabari to Sengun, each one of them have certain weaknesses or maybe limitations in their game. And then certain guys that come off the bench might provide a strength or a very niche skill that might be more beneficial at the end of a game or in crunch time, that kind of thing. And I think it's a really fascinating discussion to kind of figure out who we think is actually going to, or maybe it's a two-part discussion, right? What do we think the Rockets' best closing lineup is going to be this season, or the most frequently used closing lineup, versus also who do we think gets sat the most of the starting five at the end of games?
Yeah, and I think, last year of the five starters, Jalen was the guy who most frequently got pulled late in games for various reasons. Typically, we know how it went. He didn't shoot well, and it would take a toll on other aspects of his game. He seemed to grow out of that after the All-Star break, and that also coincided with the Sengun injury, which took away a lot of their depth. And so the questions sort of resolved themselves. But for a lot of last season, before Tari got hurt, Tari was closing games in place of Jalen when Jalen didn't have it going in December. And then before the All-Star break, it was Amin at times, even with the shooting limitations, that provided so much value defensively and in other areas that, the conversation at the All-Star break was whether Jalen would get benched for Amin Thompson. And so it goes back into what we were discussing earlier in this pod of, depth having a lot of advantages, but it also can bring some questions as well, in that you have these two starting quality players coming off the bench, and Amin Thompson and Tari Eason, and maybe Reed Shepherd gets there as well, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, I think you have two in Amin and Tari, maybe three with Steven Adams, but I think Steven Adams will be a little bit minutes limited anyway, coming off knee surgery, and so that'll sort of resolve itself. So I think there's largely two, Amin and Tari, that you're going to be looking at. And I think the idea is that with Jalen showing you what he did after the All-Star break, and now the Rockets showing they believe in Jalen with the contract, it's not that it's impossible for Jalen to get benched, but I think it's a little bit less likely. And so I think more than likely what's going to happen here is that Jalen's jumped a little bit ahead for the time being of Dillon and Jabari in the pecking order of that starting lineup. And so I think if you did a poll on social media, folks would say Dillon is the guy you should probably bench for Amin or Tari, whoever has the hot hand on a given night, occasionally both of them. I don't know that Ime Udoka is going to see it that way, because Dillon is clearly in Ime's circle of trust. He's arguably their best perimeter defender. Before he had the oblique injury last year, he was shooting about 38% on threes at volume. He looked very good as a shooter this preseason. He's still a little stronger than Jabari, I would say, although, Jabari did bulk up this offseason, so maybe the gap has narrowed there. Jabari does have some advantages in length, but, Dillon brings a certain physicality to the role, an enforcer-type mindset that I don't think Jabari in year three has just yet. So while Jabari has the edge in terms of length, upside, all of those things, for Ime Udoka wanting to win games and scrap, I don't think it's going to be cut and dry. There's going to be games where he might want to close with Dillon. And if that's the case, look, the closest thing to a dress rehearsal in the preseason was that third game against New Orleans. And down the stretch in the first half, it was Amin playing over Jabari. I don't think that's going to happen every game. There's going to be some where if Dillon isn't shooting well, it could be in place of Dillon. Maybe Amin and Tari both have it going, and they both play in place of Dillon and Jabari. But I think going into this year, it's not that it's impossible for it to be Jalen, but I think it's probably a little more likely for it to be Dillon or Jabari than it is Jalen this year. And Jackson, we talked about this at the game last week. I brought this up to you, and you had a really good point, which is that when you take Jabari out of that lineup, he's your one guy amongst the starters that is clearly above average height-wise and length-wise for his position. So what you also have to consider is, hey, if you remove the 6'11", super long and agile power forward, are you a little bit too small? Are you going to be giving up a little too many rebounds? I mean, that's a huge part of the formula for the Rockets. But if they're undersized, even if they're athletic, look, are there going to be some long arms that give second chance points that otherwise the Rockets wouldn't give up if they have the length of Jabari Smith Jr.? It's going to be very complicated. It's probably going to vary from game to game based on matchup, but there's a lot that goes into it. It's going to be a little more complicated than last year when it felt like, the easy answer was, well, if Jalen's not playing well, Jalen's going to be, the guy that gets taken out. Don't know if it's going to be the case this year. Maybe occasionally, but not a ton.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think Amin and Dillon are the most obvious candidates. I mean, not Amin and Dillon. Dillon and Jabari are the most obvious candidates to lose some of those finishing time minutes. And I think both candidates in Tari and Amin are large candidates, but I think Amin's first up, and I wouldn't be surprised if Amin finished like 30 games this year. You know what I mean? And the reason the reason for it is because of the ambidextrous nature of his game, the ability to play up and down the lineup and serve various different roles. And I think largely whoever doesn't have it shooting wise, that game, Amin is probably going to take those minutes, because what you can count on Amin to do is be consistent as a defender, to not make very many mistakes, to be on point with his rotations, and you can put him on the best player on the opposing team's team, and you can trust him to actually shut that guy down with his incredible athleticism. And like Ben was saying, Jabari offers this aspect of his game where he's the biggest guy on the court. He has the most length, right? But more importantly, I think, is he has the ability to stretch the floor, right? While offering those things. But if, Jabari didn't shoot it well in preseason, of course, it's a small sample size, but I can envision a scenario where Jabari doesn't really have it one game. And so you're not getting the stretch, the stretch four that you really need. And in those cases, I think Amin might pose as a more appealing option, because you're probably going to have to grind out that game anyway defensively, right? If guys aren't shooting, and you want to have your best defender on the floor, and he seems to have grown another inch. And so I can really see him, competing on the boards, being all over the floor, and really being disruptive in a way that will be hard to keep him out of finishing lineups, right? Really, really making the spark, the steals, the energy plays that come alive at the end of the game, that can change the energy of your team and really propel you forward to win games.
Yeah, and one other point on Amin that I would raise, if you use the 4 out of the dunker slot, which even in the preseason, I wondered how this was going to work once Sengun comes back. Well, we saw a lot of Sengun operating out of the high post, and so if you put Amin in that dunker slot, which is where he had so much success late last season, even though he's a little smaller in terms of length and height than Jabari, because he's more explosive as an athlete, he's arguably more effective in that role, even though you wouldn't think he is based on, just height and weight. So it might not be Jabari's, measurements as much of an advantage as you would think. A couple other little things that I would add to this discussion, just as Steven Adams is likely to be a little limited by minutes coming off of leg surgery. The same could be true with Tari, maybe especially early in the year. They try and cap him at 20 to 25 minutes per game. And so that puts him slightly behind him in terms of likelihood to, get stretched to 30 minutes and finish a game. And then the other factor, not saying Ime Udoka would knowingly do this, but Jabari and Tari going into, contract extensions next summer, potentially the same spot that Jalen and Sengun were the last few months, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for the Rockets from a business perspective if their counting stats are limited, because they're playing about, 25 minutes a game instead of 30, and that's not putting up, all-star level numbers. I'm not saying the Rockets would do that intentionally. Obviously, they want to win games. I'm just saying, it's a little thing to keep in the back of your mind. If those guys are capped a little bit, then that could work to the benefit of keeping this team together for the long haul, because it makes them, a little more likely to sign team-friendly deals next summer.
No, I love that note. I think it's actually a fantastic point, right? Ultimately, you look up and down the roster, there's a couple guys. I know we're still much further removed from, what we envision to be, a Cam Whitmore extension down the line, right? But the Rockets have already committed a large sum of money to Jalen Green. So, assuming he is, that locked into that 2-guard spot for the foreseeable future, what does Cam Whitmore's minutes totals look like, over the next 2-3 seasons? And is he kind of stuck in that backup mold where he's only able to crack 15, maybe 20 minutes a night, and the Rockets are going to be able to down the line be able to get him on more of a team-friendly deal, just because he doesn't have the true counting stats to be able to warrant a sizable new contract? I want to give a quick shout out to a good friend of the program, Stanford KP, who's brought up this point a few different times throughout this past season. But I think one other element when we look at these lineups and the effectiveness of certain lineups, the skill set between Dillon Brooks and Jabari Smith Jr. right now is pretty duplicative, right? Because they do the same thing. They're essentially just 3-and-D guys, right? They space the floor offensively. They can both put the ball on the floor a little bit and attack a closeout, but it's not the most effective. They're not really going to be, making that next extra pass. When they do that, it's oftentimes a straight line drive, maybe one quick dribble and then pass it to the next guy, around the horn, that kind of thing. But they're not really dynamic offensive players. Now, TBD on what year 3 looks like for Jabari Smith Jr. I'm still holding firm on my Jabari Smith Jr. stock. I want to see him evolve as a player, and I think he has the skills to do it. Now, will he have the developmental runway? Will he have the opportunity to do it, right? Because there's so many mouths to feed in this Rockets offense, on top of them also trying to play a winning brand of basketball. There just might not be enough time for experimentation for Jabari to really find himself or find the best version of himself offensively. And he might be kind of, pigeonholed into this role of just, hey, knock out the open shots you get offensively, make the right offensive play. And that's kind of it, right? Leave the big fancy moves and all that stuff to Sengun and Jalen and the highlight reel plays and all that stuff. But I think that's when you look at a guy like Amin Thompson, who can provide you that elite level defense that both of those guys also give you, but he gives you a much more dynamic presence offensively. And one thing that I thought was going to be an issue with this squad in playing Amin Thompson and Sengun in heavy minutes with each other on the floor was a spacing factor, right? Because, we know that Sengun hasn't been the best floor spacer to this point in his career. He's lost a little bit of confidence in that three ball. It looks like he's had his confidence renewed by Ime Udoka and the Rockets coaching staff, which is a fantastic sign. TBD on how that translates this season. But the Rockets, it doesn't really hurt their spacing as much because, like you were saying earlier, Ben, when you play Amin Thompson out of the dunker spot, if Sengun is involved in those actions as the screener, then the spacing actually isn't that bad because you've got Amin in the dunker, you've got Sengun involved in the action, and then you've got two guys spaced off on the wings to be able to knock down threes. And the spacing is honestly pretty healthy, all things considered.
Yeah, it is. And one point in favor of Jabari that I want to raise, because I feel like I've sort of talked down Jabari for a lot of this segment, but look, he can do something. You've talked about the ability to get him going in the mid-range in the past, Jackson, and it may be difficult to do because there are so many mouths to feed on this team, but I think it ties back into one of the larger themes of, this season and how the roster is constructed. All these guys we're talking about as options are very good defensively. And so this team, assuming health, should definitely be top 10 defensively. The challenge in terms of can you make the playoffs in the tough Western Conference is going to be, can you not give back offensively what you gain defensively? Last year, they're basically about 10th on defense, give or take all year, but about 20th on offense. That averages out to 15th dead average, and you were 41-41. And so you missed the playoffs because of that. Offense needs to be at least average. And so when you look at these guys, they all bring certain things to the table defensively, but how can they help you offensively as well? And so Jabari does some things. We know the Rockets prioritize rebounding, and so there's going to be matchups where his length can help you crash the glass. But also, if things get sticky, his ability to rise and fire in the mid-range, that could unlock a little bit offensively as well. So I think that's the case for Jabari, and why it's going to be tough for Ime Udoka. It's that, we can talk about the defensive advantages of all of these guys, and they're real. That's important. But at the end of the day, we know this team's going to be good defensively. What's going to, dictate, in my opinion, whether they make the playoffs or not is, can they make strides offensively? And so with Jabari's body type and his shot profile, there are some unique things that he can bring to the table. And so that's how he's going to be able to make a compelling argument as well.
Yeah, and I just want to add. I mean, I feel like we're talking about this not just because of the level of talent, but just the diversity of the positional flexibility of Amin Thompson. And the ability for the coach to trust him and be plug and play in a lot of different roles. And I can just envision games where we're going against a Luka Doncic who really likes to target your least lateral defender on the floor. And that could be Alperen Sengun. And that's not a guy we would want to leave on an island with Luka Doncic, right? Where he's going to go over and over pick and roll until he isolates that type of guy. In those scenarios, I can see Amin coming in for Alperen Sengun and leaving Jabari in, so we still have size, right? And we have a guy with the versatility to guard, and we can go 5 out, switch everything, and really kind of match up to that type of team that spaces the floor so well now with Klay Thompson and all their great shooters, right? In those specialized scenarios, even in those situations, Amin Thompson arises as a stellar option for this team. And I think this is not about the other starters on our team not being good enough. This is actually just about the level of versatility that Amin provides that will allow us to play situational basketball at the end of games, in which Amin fits in a lot of different situations.
And to that point, real quickly, Ime Udoka has made it a point several times to note that Jabari as a small ball 5 is still viable. I know a lot of fans aren't thinking about it going into the year because all your minutes are spoken for at center between Sengun and Adams, but situationally, depending on matchups, that is an option as well.
I could definitely see Jabari at the 5 in certain closing lineups. For me personally, one of the lineups I'm most looking forward to seeing get extended run this season is that lineup of Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Amen Thompson, Tari Eason, and Alperen Sengun. That 5-man lineup I think is going to be an absolute buzzsaw, wrecking ball, whatever you want to call it this season. It's got the perfect blend of positional flexibility, rebounding, skills, shooting. That lineup really has it all. And also you could take Tari out and plug Jabari back in there, but really it's kind of subtracting Dillon Brooks, putting him in Thompson into that lineup. I'm with you there, Madison. We haven't gotten to our next episode is going to be our bold predictions thing, but I'm right there with you. I think Amen Thompson is going to close a lot more games than he doesn't close this upcoming season. But we want to hear from you guys. We want to know, what are your biggest questions heading into this Rockets season? How did you feel about what we talked about in this episode? Let us know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But you guys know the drill. Let everybody know where they can track you down at. Madison, go first, then Ben.
Yeah, you can track me down on X at MadmanLeaks. Come talk Rockets basketball and NBA draft.
For me, at Ben DuBose and rocketsbar.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for part 1 of our Houston Rockets season preview series. Be on the lookout for part 2 coming out tomorrow. But as always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day. Like and subscribe on YouTube and drop us a comment while you're there. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.